Midterm elections like these notoriously feature low voter turnout, and that's especially true among young people who don't seem to care as much about congressional elections as they do about presidential ones. Think of it this way. A Pew Research survey just last week found that 98% of Americans have heard about the Ebola outbreak. 98%. 49% of Americans say they're following Ebola very closely. Almost 30% of Americans say they're following the U.S. airstrikes against ISIS very closely. But only 16% of Americans say they're paying very close attention to the midterm elections next week. So right this very minute, strategists for the Democrats and Republicans are working hard to get out the vote among their supporters in the last week before the election. Now, back in the day, that usually meant knocking on doors, party workers walking around neighborhoods, knocking on doors to urge people to vote. Today, there's still plenty of door knocking and plenty of postal mailers being sent out to potential voters, but today these efforts are fueled by a high-octane mix of digital campaigning, using Facebook especially to encourage specific voters, individual voters, to participate in the election, but also Twitter and email and other social media sites. That phenomenon is really quite new. It's really only been in use since the 2008 presidential election, when the Republicans realized they were outgunned in the social media arena by the Obama campaign. In 2012, the social media battle for votes took off like a shot, and this week, when voter turnout is more important to both parties than ever, it's really warfare on the digital scene. Our guest speaker tonight is Teddy Goff, one of the masterminds of the digital campaign battleground in 2012. Teddy was digital director for President Obama's re-election campaign. He managed 250 people responsible for the campaign's social media, email, web, online advertising, online organizing, and video presences. Time magazine described his work as redefining the limits of viral politics, not Ebola politics. I'm sure Teddy will recount some of his accomplishments, but keeping in mind the importance of voter turnout next week, Teddy was responsible for raising almost $700 million over the internet, for registering more than 1 million voters online, for building a Facebook network of 45 million people and a Twitter following of 33 million people. He ran the largest online media political campaign in history, at least until this year, $100 million, accomplishing 133 million video views. In 2008, Teddy Goff was in charge of the Obama state-level digital campaigns, and we'll probably ask him about that tonight. Teddy is a graduate of Yale University. Joining me tonight on stage is Professor Lindsay Hoffman, my colleague in the communication department, whose research and teaching focuses on just the sort of social media role in politics we'll be discussing tonight. I'm really pleased to note that Lindsay will be taking over the National Agenda program beginning next year. A reminder that you're encouraged to use your mobile devices tonight in this room to comment on what you hear. So tweet away, don't turn off those phones, just silence them. Two more announcements. Don't forget our political film series called Fade to Black, about the dark humor of political feature films, running this fall right here in Mitchell Hall. The next movie is next Wednesday right here. The schedule is online at www.udel.edu/nationalagenda. And our next speaker program on November 12th is a bit up in the air right now. Our scheduled speaker, Mike McCurry, former White House spokesman, has jury duty that day. Civic duty, right? We're working on that, but you'll want to monitor your email just in case we have to announce a change of some kind. Now, please welcome Teddy Goff to the University of Delaware.
Well, hey guys, thank you, Professor, and other professor. Thank you, professors, and thank you all for being here. This has been such a fun day. I don't know how many of you know but Ralph and his team put together a great a whole afternoon with the class and dinner and even a glass of wine. So this has really been a treat. This is a lot more fun than what I would otherwise be doing, which is pulling my hair out over the outcome of next week's midterm. So this was a great, to take away 1 out of the 7 days that remains and get to be with a bunch of cool young people has been a lot of fun. You know, as the professor mentioned, I oversaw President Obama's digital campaign in 2012, and I always, when talking about 2012, like to go back and talk a little bit about 2008, and I assume almost everybody in this room will remember that the 2008 campaign was really celebrated for how effectively it used social media and digital media, and you know, was considered the first social campaign. And I worked on that campaign, and you know, we were certainly as innovative as we were able to be. But the reality is, and I think this is something that we tend to forget, that a lot of the platforms that we talk about, Facebook, Twitter, all these things that it's almost difficult to remember life before and life without, were unbelievably new back then, even newer than, you know, I think we recall in retrospect. On Election Day 2008, Facebook was less than 1/10 the size it is today, less than 1/10. Twitter was so new and so much in its infancy that you know, people today and in the corporate world and the political world and everywhere else talk about Twitter strategies. You know, you would have been laughed out of a room if you talked about a Twitter strategy. That just wasn't part of the vocabulary. And even the smartphone, and I apologize to the 20 or so students who've heard me say similar things over the course of the day, but who are in the front row, just to make it known to me that they can tell that I'm repeating myself here. But even the smartphone, you know, Senator Obama announced that he was running in February of 2007. What I consider to be the first smartphone, the first iPhone, came out in the summer of 2007. So we had 3 or 4 months of running that campaign before apps, before you know, before the mobile world as we know it. And you know, so all this stuff has come an incredibly long way. So to that end, on Election Day 2012, as Ralph mentioned, we had about 45 million Facebook fans. We had 34 million Twitter followers. Smartphones were, you know, nearly ubiquitous, as of course everybody knows. And what we thought about, you know, as a campaign team trying to figure out what to do about all this, was, you know, we thought not only do all these very, very rapid changes mean that campaigns have to learn how to do a whole lot more stuff. Which they do, you know, and you've got to learn this and that algorithm and this and that ad platform, and it's all a lot more complicated and high tech and targeted, and so you've got to be on top of all that. But we thought, you know, at a more fundamental level, that the relationship between ordinary people and campaigns and politicians and politics itself has changed. And we used to say that if in 2008, if we'd been off our game somehow, if we had put out a piece of content that just wasn't that good or wasn't sufficiently local or timely or you know, in some other way kind of disappointed our supporters, that certainly wouldn't have been a good thing, and they might have clicked away. All of a sudden in 2012, they've got the ability to click away and then tweet about why they've lost confidence in the president and why they've lost confidence in his campaign. And so the role of ordinary supporters has changed really fundamentally. You know, if you think about how campaigns used to run, you know, there wasn't all that much for a supporter to do. You know, if you happen to have an awful lot of money, then you could, of course, write a large check. If you happen to live in one of the 8 or 10 or 12 states that are battlegrounds, then you could, of course, go volunteer if you lived close to a field office and if you had the time. And all of a sudden, you know, these tools are in the hands of everybody, and everybody has the ability to affect not just 1 or 2 people at a time over the course of a dinner conversation, but potentially hundreds or thousands of people, you know, potentially across state borders if you don't live in a battleground state, and that really fundamentally changes politics, because you know, I firmly believe that as people's power grows, their expectations grow. And so all of a sudden you've got people who don't just know that they've got the ability to reply back to a politician whose policies they don't like, or ask a question in public and have all their Facebook friends see that that question has been asked. You know, all of a sudden you have people who expect to be treated a certain way, expect that people in positions of power are going to respond to them, expect that they're going to solicit their feedback and then do something about it. And that really changes the democracy in a lot of fundamental ways. Now, against this backdrop of really unbelievable rapid change over the course of just 4 years between 2 campaigns, there's a couple things that don't change, and I always think it's important to note this because I think, we tend to, I think on the one hand we may forget how quickly everything's changing, and on the other hand I think we get carried away and forget that certain things aren't changing. One thing that hadn't changed for us was the goals of campaigns haven't changed, and this is true for the campaigns that are in the unfortunate position of duking it out over the next 6 days, and this will be true in 2016 and 2020. The things that we cared about, we were measured along 5 dimensions. Our goals were to recruit volunteers, register voters, turn them out to vote, persuade those who weren't going to otherwise vote our way, and raise money to pay for those things. And so those are the exact same sets of things that we would have been incentivized to do 4 years earlier and 40 years earlier. And they really haven't changed, and they'll never change. That's how you win campaigns. The other thing that I think hasn't changed, and this is the one that I think we may lose sight of because the pace of life is so different and the day-to-day of our lives is so different. But we, at a really fundamental level believed on our campaign that people haven't changed. And the human mind hasn't changed all that much. So maybe the ways in which we receive information and make our voices heard and so forth have changed. But people are just people. And so, we thought, well, what do people want from us? Do they want to be wowed by, by our technological wizardry? Did they want to know that we were able to put out the most effective negative ad of all time? No. We thought what they wanted from us was, pretty basic and the same kinds of things you would want from anything that's in your life, a friendship or a relationship or whatever else you may do. We thought that people wanted to feel that they were being respected. We thought that people wanted to have a sense of connection and a sense of inspiration to the endeavor they were participating in. We thought that they wanted to be able to make friends with each other. We thought they didn't want to feel like they were having their time wasted. We thought they didn't want to feel like they were being subjected to hypocritical, negative politics. And these are fairly basic human attributes that don't have much to do with the internet. We were just trying to reach these people over the internet. And so, while on the one hand we're trying to do the most high-tech stuff we could possibly imagine in the most targeted and hyper-local and efficient way, and on the other hand, more than I think has really been reported after the fact, we're trying to appeal to some pretty basic human sentiments, and we're spending more time concerning ourselves with the question, how do we keep people engaged? How do we keep people inspired? How do we make people know that they can trust us? We spend more time on those kinds of questions than on these high-tech, complicated other stuff that I'm sure we'll talk about. And this wasn't just ideological. It wasn't just because we had an idea of how politics ought to work, although we also did. I said a minute ago, and as did as did Ralph, that the president had 45 million Facebook fans on Election Day. What's even more important is that those people were friends with 99% of the US-based Facebook population. That's more than the number of people who vote. And so it became really clear that, that here we are in this era of declining trust in institutions, declining trust in politicians, a declining ability to have people even pay attention to your ad, let alone trust it. But sort of a cross-current to that and sort of inoculating us against all of those not so helpful dynamics in the culture, we have the ability to reach almost everyone in the country and to do it, not as a campaign institution trying to sell you something by way of a paid ad, but rather to do it via your friends, via the people who supported us. And so this question of how do you keep people engaged, how do you keep people inspired, how do you try to be a little piece of people's lives and a positive piece of people's lives became really critical to winning the election, because we knew that if we did that, and if we had answers to those questions, and if we gave people a reason to stick with us and to retweet us every now and again and share stuff on Facebook every now and again, we could reach the entire country that way. And we could do it, with the most powerful set of messengers possible, because the only people that it's consistently proven that people trust here in this era of declining trust, it isn't the media and it certainly isn't politicians, but it's people they already know. And so that really became the question for us. And so we'll spend a little bit of time in a minute talking about how we actually did that, how we thought about content, how we thought about social media, how we thought about videos. The other thing that I want to make sure I mention is of course how we then optimized it, because we were very serious about running the best creative process we possibly could, coming up with the best possible content that appealed to us, content that we thought would inspire people. And then the question became how you get people to actually watch it and how you reach people. people, and this is very material right now as campaigns all across the country are doing the same thing in the context of their midterms. Because at the same time that that people are to some degree reduced to very base attributes. Is content interesting or isn't it? Is this fun to watch or isn't it? You have this incredible ability on the part of campaigns, very helpful to campaigns, sometimes a little bit disconcerting to the actual consumer, to the voter, to target people. And so and again we'll talk about what these technologies actually look like. But our campaign was able to be run on the basis of a handful of models that basically created individual voter profiles for people and allowed us to come to conclusions about what we were trying to do to whom. So, for example, you hear a lot in politics about the undecided voter. One thing that we concluded relatively early on is that all undecided voters are not created equal. So you may run into someone who would tell a pollster or would tell a campaign worker that he or she is undecided. But that person one, may not be telling the truth, but two, may never become decided. That may be someone who is going to be undecided till the very end and then not vote. We actually found that there are some people who are undecided, but they become less likely to support us the more they're exposed to our campaign materials. So not only are we not doing ourselves any good if we're targeting these people, we're actually doing ourselves harm because the more they see our stuff, the more they're that much sure that they're not going to vote for us. And so we had a concept of persuadability, not just who's undecided, but who's persuadable, and tried to find the subset of undecided voters who we could actually move the needle with as we hit them with ads, as we knocked on their door, as we did all the other things we tried to do. And so this was just one example, but but we had 4 or 5 models that kind of governed the entire campaign. Who's persuadable? Who's contactable? So you may be persuadable, but you may never answer your phone, in which case we don't want to spend a lot of time calling you on the phone. Who's registered, who's unregistered, all these different things. Even when it came to the supporters, who's likely to volunteer and who isn't. Because someone may be very supportive, but if they're not likely to volunteer, then we don't want to waste time trying to get them to volunteer. And so at the same time that we're working on content and we're thinking very seriously about how to engage people and how to inspire people, we're also working on the most sophisticated possible means of delivery. And trying to do these through, through Facebook and through Twitter and so forth. We were talking earlier about how much the field of advertising has changed. It used to be that, in the early days of the internet, if I wanted to buy online advertising, I would have to call up, let's say, NewYorkTimes.com and say, I'd like your homepage. And so a whole bunch of people are going to come to that homepage, some who are persuadable and some who are already in our camp and some who are already in their camp. And increasingly, you're able to just say, I don't care where I reach them, I care who I reach. These are the 100,000 people I think are persuadable, and I'll get them on ESPN, New York Times, Google, or anywhere else, but these are who I want. So you're seeing you're seeing just an incredibly rapid amount of change, in sort of both of these fronts. I think we'll get into a couple of questions, I think, from you guys, and then hopefully from the audience. I think what's interesting, you talk about, what this does on the part of the voter, what this does to the voter. And for the voter, I think it's relatively clear. It gives the voter, all these new and interesting ways to receive information, to make their voices heard, to share content with friends, and to influence the state of the country. I think the other thing that's interesting is what this actually does to the democracy. Because as a political operative, it's great to have all these new tools to reach people and reach them efficiently. But something we've spent a lot of time over the course of today talking about is, in what ways is this good and in what ways is this bad? You'd like to think that millions of people having access to new tools and better information and new ways to get involved in the democracy would be an unalloyed good for the country. And I think what we're seeing now, and certainly what we're seeing in the kind of chaos that is the political system today, it's great that millions more people can be involved more directly with their democracy. It's also, it also sort of exacerbates some of the worst aspects of our democracy, where you have misinformation spreading even more quickly than ever before, and you have the ability for, for voters to be distracted even more easily by things that don't really matter relative to the big policy questions of the day. So I hope what we'll get into over the next hour or so is the good and the bad, and not just thinking about it from the perspective of a campaign operative, but also as a citizen. What does this stuff mean for the democracy? What does this mean for the future of the country? And very importantly, how can we try to move the needle in the direction of progress? What can we actually do to make this all a set of positive changes for the country? But I think I'll leave my opening remarks there and pass it back to you guys.
All right, Teddy has just talked a bit about targeting, and we want to spend some more time talking about that because I think a lot of people in this room are unaware of exactly how that works, and I think it'll be a useful experience for you. But let's pick an example of, let's say you want to send out some information about environmental policy. Doesn't matter what the policy is, but let's choose environmental for a moment. How do you know which ones of the 99% of the Facebook users that you said you could reach are going to be susceptible or interested in knowing something about Obama's environmental policy? How do you find that out?
Well, there's a handful of different ways, and what you do is you sort of mix and match the different ways. So one very simple way is you go on the basis of what those same people have responded to in the past. So if you are coming to our website and you're always going straight to the page about environmental policy, that's a pretty good indication that you care about environmental policy. And so that's self-reported information by and large. I mean, that's you effectively saying to us by virtue of what you click on that that's what you care about. And so we're going to go back to you with that kind of information. Wait
a minute, let me stop you there. Mm-hmm. So I'm in a browser, mm-hmm. and I click on the Obama website, and I go to the environmental page. Now, how do you know who I am? And how do you connect that to Facebook?
Well, so, first of all, we had the tactical advantage of running our race before the NSA disclosures that came in 2013. I don't know how much more complicated a political environment we would have been in had our analytics work been under the shadow of all this, all these concerns about Big Brother. That stuff came up for us very rarely. But this is something that all campaigns do. This is something that all websites do, corporate websites, Amazon, anybody else, including even news media websites, and I would venture your university website. The browser or the website contains a piece of code that allows the browser to pass back to the campaign information about who you are, and then to watch and then to continue to collect information about what you click on, and this is very important, in an anonymized way, information about where you go elsewhere. So what we have no ability to do, and what is obviously of the utmost importance that we continue not to be able to do, is to say, all right, Ralph, went straight from our website to ESPN.com and then to Macy's. That we can't do. What we can do is go to advertisers, go to Facebook, go to Google, go to Yahoo, and say, one of a couple things. We can say we would like 1 million people who fit this profile. White, male, 29 to 54, and interested in sports. And so they may know, they don't know you, but they've got your cookie information. They know you've been to ESPN.com, and they've got other information on you, and so they can serve ads via us to you, where still nobody has access to your personal information. The other thing you can increasingly now do is not even have to go on the basis of profile, but actually just say, here's who we want to reach. So all campaigns use voter files. Voter file is a database that we collect in this country. They're run by the secretaries of state in each of the states. They're publicly available.
Government information.
Government information.
Containing what?
You can Google them. Anybody who's registered to vote, it's got their age, address, party registration, whether they voted in the past, obviously not who they voted for because we don't have access to that, needless to say. And I think it varies a bit by state. Maybe some of them have a bit more information than that. What you can now do is match that information, what the major internet companies, Google, which controls YouTube, Facebook, Yahoo, what these companies now allow you to do is match the cookie data that they've got to the voter file information that you've got. So what campaigns can increasingly do, not with every last piece of inventory, which means political ad real estate, or ad real estate, not with every last bit of ad real estate, but with a growing share of ad real estate, is say, it's irrelevant to me if we're reaching Latinos or women or men. What I want to reach is these people. And some of them will be Latinos and some won't. Some will be women and some will be men. And so you can say, here's the names. Give me these names.
Not just generic people. These are people by name.
By names, yeah. So you can this is all run through third parties. So there's obviously a lot of concern about intrusions into people's privacy and so forth. Right now, the privacy protections are pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. So there's no ability for any advertiser who doesn't break the law or work with some kind of, or work with the third party who's breaking the law to ever find out what you, Ralph, are doing. But there is obviously an increasing ability for us to put lists of names, run them through a third-party filter, have them become anonymized, give them over to Yahoo, and then Yahoo winds up serving you with an ad.
Beyond privacy concerns, though, are there ethical or moral concerns with collecting and using these data, basically targeting people with messages that are already likely to be supportive of? In other words, are we just creating many, many echo chambers where we're creating a more polarized environment through these micro-targeting strategies?
That's a concern. First of all, I would say, the overwhelming interest of campaigns in using this data is to give people a better experience. And that may sound a little sort of Pollyannish, but we have no interest in accumulating data just for fun. We're not going to, well, I mean, maybe some unethical person wants to go sell it after the fact. Most campaigns don't hire that kind of person. The point is to win the election, and you win the election by, by giving people the kind of information that's relevant to them. And so, I always think, while I understand the concerns about these kinds of technology, if I'm someone who is highly likely to be, who just went to a website about shoes and seems to want to buy shoes, if what I'm seeing on Facebook is ads for shoes, is it a little creepy? Yeah, I guess it's a little creepy, but that's in fact more relevant to me than if it's an ad about something that I don't want to buy, and I'd rather get the shoe, there's a good chance that the shoe website.
Consumer ads are a little bit different though. I mean, we're now in the public sphere. We're now talking about political discourse, and we've sort of lost that serendipity of running into someone in the town square, on the street corner. And I think, I'm just curious if you think this micro-targeting could have some negative.
I think all the stuff that we're talking about has a lot of positive effects and some negative effects. And I think what you're talking about is a concern. Google actually did a study of, because you hear a lot of people say that what the internet does is it kind of balkanizes people into their camps. Instead of reading some kind of credible, non-biased news source, you're either reading your like-minded friends' Facebook posts, or you go into a partisan news site because there's so many additional options and so many of them are partisan. So Google did a study and actually found that people who use social media more are actually more likely to encounter a wide range of views, not less likely. So it's obviously important that that continue to be the case, and that be even more and more the case over time. But so it doesn't, I think it's a concern. It doesn't seem to be, bearing itself out. And as long as you've got if you've got a politician who is, shaping their views, or sort of adjusting their views on the basis of what individual voters seem to want to hear, that's a problem. If you've got politicians who believe what they believe, but want to serve you information about the economy because you seem to care about that, to me, does it carry some concerns? Yes. Not grave ones, though.
Let's drill down one more step. You've been talking about serving ads, and I think we understand that. But the next step is, and I think this is happening, and we're going to show some, if you want to switch to the first slide, we'll take a look at that. On Facebook, you won't be able to see it, but it's on Facebook, people get messages that are aimed at them, sometimes by name. That's not serving an ad. That's sending a message to a particular Facebook user promoting some aspect of a campaign.
And if we could, I think this is a screen grab from the Mitt Romney campaign. And
I can't account for them.
Right, but I'd like for the audience to take note that it basically is sort of a generic message, and it's actually was repeated like 3 times in a row. If we go to the next slide, you'll see
Just hit forward on there.
You'll see an example from the Obama campaign. I'm one of these people who, I don't know, I'm a glutton for punishment. I follow every candidate. I get their emails multiple times a day. I was also following the Obama campaign. What the Obama campaign did was say, Lindsay, you know Shannon, Jennifer, and so in Ohio. Can you tell them that they can vote early? Or Lindsay, 11,735 people named Lindsay have already voted. Ask all those people who are listed in that second thing live in Ohio. And then here's a friend shared something with friends to help re-elect Obama. So it was so highly personalized, and it was so distinct from Romney's campaign. I'm just wondering how you guys created that and how you identified that as being a goal to make it so highly personalized.
And again, that's not an ad. You're asking an individual user to contact her individual friends who live in a swing state where you know you need those votes. Lindsay's not in that state, but
well, so it's important that that's not an ad, because one thing that we couldn't do, one thing that we wouldn't have been able to do in an ad is access people's friends. So if we have access to information of who your friends are, that means that you've permissioned us to do so. So a lot of the, a lot of this stuff, you're sort of constrained by what the platforms themselves allow. As a matter of fact, this particular thing, which I'll get into, Facebook has concluded they no longer allow. So we sort of snuck it in there in 2012, and we'll have to scramble to how to replicate that same kind of experience in 2016. What you're referring to, which we spoke a little bit about earlier, is we created a match of Facebook data with this voter file that we were just talking about. And so, our goal was, we thought to ourselves, all right, so, we've got all these Facebook fans, and, same goes for Twitter, but, Facebook was our biggest following, and is also, of course, the platform with the most users. And we know, again, that 99% of the country is a friend of a friend of Barack Obama. And we know that the most credible person in their lives is the people they already know. So it was extremely important for us to reach people with the most credible messenger we could. One thing that we're seeing, and this is probably obvious to everybody, is young voters by and large don't have landlines. Their address information in the voter file may not be accurate. Young voters tend to move around a lot, so we found that for a huge number, in fact, just about 50% of our young targets, 18 to 29, the only way that we could reach them was on Facebook. And we knew that we had data to show us who their friends were. So what we did was we created this tool that Facebook no longer, unfortunately, will allow us to do, that matches the Facebook data with the voter file data, so that we know, John Smith at 123 Main Street is the same guy as Facebook.com/John Smith, who's a friend of our supporter, Jane. And that was the tool that allowed us to go into your notification box and say, all right, here are your 3 friends, because with that information, then we could mix and match, or I should say, sort of rearrange even further and say, all right, well, if you liked this video about the president's record on jobs, don't just share it with anybody. Don't even just share it with your undecided voter friends. Share it with the ones who live in Ohio first, and Florida second, and North Carolina third. And we could do the same with registration. If we put out a graphic that says, here's how you register to vote. Here's the friends of yours that we think are not registered to vote, as far as our models tell us. So, this was a huge priority. One, because because of the validation effect that comes from people hearing from their friends, and even more importantly, because a lot of these people we simply couldn't reach in any other way.
the validation effect, I think you've mentioned that a little bit, is really something that's been like it's the golden ring of politics for years, is being able to get somebody next door to you, your next door neighbor, a trusted friend, a relative, to just mention something to you carries a lot more weight than just an anonymous ad that appears on the screen. Let's switch to the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just to say, we see the personalization again in the emails that we got. So the Romney-Ryan campaign says friend. On the next slide, we'll see an email from the Obama campaign that specifically addresses me. And interestingly enough, I still get all the emails from the GOP and the Democratic Party, and this is still the case. The GOP emails to me still call me friend, whereas the Democratic Party emails call me by name, which I think is kind of interesting. So what is it about that personalization? Why would I care that 11,735 other Lindsays voted already? Why did that become?
Well, on the 11,000, however many Lindsays, I think you probably caught one of our more creative tests. I think the reality is you probably don't care. Over the course of 19 months, you sort of try a lot. So some of it is gets pretty silly. But look, I mean,
got you to read it though.
Absolutely, got my attention.
Well, this is the thing that you learn when you run a lot of tests, as we did, and almost everything we did was tested. The drivers of human behavior can be so mysterious, and people don't always know why they do the things that they do. And so, here's my favorite example of this. We sent thousands of emails. Those of you who had the misfortune of being on our email list know, we sometimes sent thousands of emails in a day.
Yeah.
And so each and every one of them would be tested in various versions before they would go out to the full list. list, which is a long-standing practice, the details of which I don't have to bore you, but the net of it is, you can run multiple different versions of an email past snippets of your audience before you have to then send the winning version to the rest of your audience. And so we tested everything, big picture stuff down to the very little picture stuff. And one of the most compelling results we ever found was we tested the exact phrasing that asked for money, because a lot of these emails were fundraising emails. So, please donate, will you please donate, please contribute, donate today, little things. And the winner, by a margin of 30%, I mean a big difference, was you should donate. And so we spent the rest of the campaign saying you should donate, and raised probably hundreds of thousands of incremental dollars off of saying should. Now, is any voter in the world sitting there thinking, I was going to donate, but they said please, they didn't say I should, so I didn't? No, of course not. But the reality is, we're not always aware of the way our minds work, and these little variations, obviously, trigger certain things in our in our brains that get us to do things, and there's so many examples of that. And sometimes, to an almost distressing degree. I mean, you would want big picture questions of, do you have a positive tone, or are you attacking Romney? Is it from the president, or is it from the first lady? You would want those to be the things that made the biggest difference. And often those things made almost no difference, and it was these little things of what color font it was, or was it a really big picture or a really little picture, and things like that. And so, I don't specifically recall that Lindsay's in Ohio test, but, I mean, we saw enough kind of wacky results that that kind of encouraged us to keep running wacky tests.
Let's switch to the next slide, please. Speaking of wacky tests, one of the things campaigns try to do with targeting, micro-targeting, is to reach people not just by name or by their street address, geography, but also by their interests. And Lindsay, why don't you tell the story of this, this slide?
We were talking about direct mail earlier, and direct mail is certainly not a dead thing. This still exists. And in 2012, I received a number of direct mail ads from this particular group. I'm sorry, I'll have to look at it again. Republican Jewish Coalition. And they were all about basically, I meet this person, I voted for Obama in 2008, but I have concerns about what's happening in 2012. I'm going to vote the other side this time. And I found these direct mail pieces really interesting and really perplexing at the same time because I'm not Jewish. So to me, it was sort of an example of direct mail and micro-targeting gone wrong. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, how do you know, when are you doing it right? How do you know you're doing it right? And what happens when you make a mistake like that? Because that's really going to turn somebody off, potentially.
Yeah. Well, here's how it works on a technical level, and then I'll address the broader question you're asking. I mean, if you had the ability to go talk to all 310 or 320 or whatever million people there are in the United States and say, who are you? Are you Jewish? Whatever, you would, but you don't have that ability. So what you do is you talk to as many people as you possibly can, collect as much information as you can, and then use models to draw conclusions about everybody else. So, for example, here's a fun one. Over the summer of 2007, what we discovered, 2011, the first summer of the second campaign, that's a period of time in which you're not going to change a lot of people's minds. You're not even really going to register that many people to vote. I mean, there's not an awful lot you can do except begin to collect information that's going to help you down the road. And so one thing we concluded through a complicated modeling process that I am nowhere near smart enough to understand the actual working mechanics of, is we found out that if you live next door to a Democrat, you are, all other things being equal, 7 points more likely to be a Democrat. So let's say you're a young Latina woman and that makes you 65% likely to be a Democrat. If you live next door to a Democrat, then you're 72% likely to be a Democrat. And so, you have all these various inputs of, age, gender, but also these unexpected things like who you live next door to and geography and every other thing we can think of. And the whole point is to build profiles of people that give us a probability that you are whatever attribute we're looking at. So, so that group, probably looked at where you live. They probably looked at whatever other information they have about you, your last name, whatever else, and concluded, they're not in the, they don't have the resources to knock on your door and ask you, but their model concluded that you were at least likely enough to be Jewish that it's worth targeting you. And it's risky, sure, and certainly you don't want to put really sort of flammable material in front of somebody if you're not exactly sure that it's up their alley. But the alternative is not to target at all, or to target in a much more blunt way. So I think all campaigns tolerate some degree of what we call false positives. Where we're pretty sure this person is going to be a supporter. Let's skip their house. Well, if they're not a supporter, you're sorry that you skipped their house. That's sort of the cost of doing business, because on balance you become so much more efficient this way.
Now, some of the social media themselves, people have talked recently about how more people of my age are beginning to use Facebook, and so it's not so much anymore a channel that appeals especially to young people or exclusively to young people. But there are some that do, and you chose, let's change slides please, you chose with the president to use something called Reddit at one point, and I want to see a show of hands here. Who in the audience knows what Reddit is? Just raise your hands. All right, so you've got maybe a third of the audience or more that doesn't know what Reddit is, so you need to explain that. Mm-hmm. And then tell us about what this slide represents.
So Reddit is a social platform that is entirely crowdsourced. So what that means is there are no editors, there are very few employees. I think they have something like 20 employees. Anybody can post content, and then the sort of the mechanism of the site is anybody can vote that content up or vote that content down. And you could be a first-time user or a person with no particular following or anything like that. If you post a piece of content that happens to get voted up, it's going to wind up on the front page of the site. And Reddit has enormous reach. It's often called the sort of gateway to virality elsewhere. So the thing that I think a lot of people in my profession say is, if something is sort of trending or goes viral on Facebook or Twitter, odds are it was trending on Reddit 3 hours earlier. So I mean, it's got this enormous kind of multiplier effect, because it tends to kind of seed content into other platforms. But again, there's no editors, there's nobody making these decisions. It's just the wisdom of the crowd. People vote content up and down. And so,
and who are the people who are mostly using Reddit?
Millions of users. Largely, though of course not exclusively by any stretch, male, largely young, largely white, it's a bit more of a sort of techie, some degree gamer crowd, as in video game people. So it's certainly, I think this is an exaggeration, because all kinds of people use Reddit who don't fit this profile. But your typical, your sort of stereotypical Reddit user is a young white guy who's into tech and into computers and into video games and that kind of thing.
And he's got his Xbox running on the other side or something.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So what did you do here?
So. Here we, I mean, as it happened, this was a real profile of person we wanted to reach. We had vulnerabilities with white voters overall. Young voters, we didn't have a vulnerability in terms of support. Obviously, you always want more, but we certainly had a vulnerability in terms of likelihood to vote. No Democrat is ever going to be as strong with men as with women. So for a lot of reasons, this was a pretty good crowd for us. And so the kind of, the signature sort of type of content on Reddit is this thing called an AMA, which stands for Ask Me Anything, which anybody can do. You could be, you or I could do one, or the President of the United States could do one, as he did. And just as with everything else on the site, it's an interview, but there's no editorial presence at all. So anybody can ask questions, and anybody, can vote those questions up or vote those questions down, and the questions that appear at the top of the interview, which is where most of the eyeballs are going to go, are the ones that have the most votes. And so we had the President of the United States do one of these on August 29th, 2012. It was, we thought it was very risky, and you made an interesting point that maybe it wasn't that risky, but we thought it was very risky because, anybody can ask anything. And, whereas, a reporter working for CNN or whoever isn't realistically going to come out of nowhere with some oddball question about, tell us about your recreational drug use in college, or the kind of thing, whatever the kind of thing is you wouldn't want to answer. A Reddit user might, and that could pop up to the top. And while he's not required to answer the question, it would be perfectly plain for everybody to see that he was there ignoring the first question and skipping down to the third or fourth or whatever. So it struck us as being very risky. Now it struck us that there was a high reward, if we didn't get bogged down in uncomfortable questions, because first of all, the reach of this kind of thing is tremendous, and second of all, this is kind of a new way for a president to communicate with people. And, after we did it, I checked all kinds of blog comments and what people on Twitter were saying about it and what people on Reddit were saying about it. And a lot of people said, you know, the mere fact that he would go to a place like Reddit, you know, that he's heard of Reddit, that he would show respect to the Reddit community, and maybe on a broader sense that he would understand that he's got to take questions from ordinary people, that he can't just be dealing with reporters, he can't just be dealing with big donors, you know, he's got to get out there, you know, face some risks, you know, and deal with people on the level in which they want to deal with him, you know, showed more about him and his connection to young people and his understanding of technology than any of his actual policy answers. So, you know, so we put a lot of time into thinking about, you know, how could we change the way a president communicates with voters. Now, obviously, we were trying to win. I mean, I'm not trying to hide that fact. I mean, this wasn't all in service of a better democracy, but you know, but you know, it didn't hurt that it was in service of a better democracy, and we also thought that in order to win, it was important to always, you know, show that he was, you know, that he's out there with ordinary people and not so far removed from people. I mean, he would often drop by bars and diners and things like that in between events, you know, and people would take pictures with him, and you know, in terms of a use of his time, that's probably the least efficient way of reaching voters he can possibly do. But you know, it just further contributed to this point that he, you know, is not so changed by the trappings of his office, and that he's somebody who wants to be responsive to people.
I think one thing that's interesting about this forum is that, you know, I could go on there and say, hi, I'm Barack Obama, President of the United States. Ask me anything. I'll be here for the next half hour or an hour. And I thought it was an interesting choice that it said, here's proof that it's me. And there's a picture of Barack Obama in a closet of some sort.
It was a green room at the University of Virginia. Someone once made a joke, what I thought was a funny joke to me later, said it looked like he was in a basement somewhere replicating the natural living environs of your average Reddit user. So you know, I think we were trying to make the Reddit users you know, feel like the president was really one of them. He's in a basement, you know, on his parents' laptop.
So I talk with my students a lot about sort of the norms of these different social media. You know,
hang on just one second. We got to show the big picture.
Okay.
Change slides, please.
That's me.
Okay, sorry.
So, so I can't, my friends and family will not listen to me talk about this anymore. So whenever I have the chance to be in front of perfect strangers, I beg to be able to show this picture. This is, you know, you guys are the only people who listen to this anymore.
So this is what it was really like, right? And who typed the phrase, hello, I'm Barack Obama, and I'm here, you know, to answer, ask me anything, I'll be here for another half hour.
That was me. So that was one of the. Yeah, thank you. That was, you know, there were two really, on a personal level, two completely surreal moments on the campaign. One was, you know, so at that particular moment, he was still he was giving a rally at the University of Virginia. He was still on stage. You know, we had timed it out. I was going to do this about 20 minutes before he was going to get back to let some questions accumulate. So, you know, just typing in or actually pasting in, because I was not going to risk typos. You know, pasting in, I'm Barack Obama, President of the United States, was, you know, was incredibly surreal. And then the other really surreal moment was on the day we launched, more than a year prior to this, August 4th, 2011. The way in which we launched was by flipping our website to be the campaign website and sending an email and putting a video up on YouTube. And it just so happened, it wasn't, of course, it wasn't my decision how it all was going to go, but it just so happened that I was, you know, the final person to say, all systems are go, you know, we can launch. So I remember at, you know, 3:59, because we want to launch at 4 a.m. on August 4th, 2011, realizing the only thing that stands between me and the President of the United States running for re-election is me. You know, I approved it. We ran. Yeah.
Go ahead, Nancy. Or do you want to do this one? Do you want to do this one next? Let's change slides. This is the last example that we'd like to ask you about.
I think this was the slide that you had provided.
Yeah. Is it up there? Okay, good. So the reason for doing this one is you talked about virality earlier, which is a word I've never heard of before, but something going viral on the web, I guess, gives it great virality. And you told us that this site was the most viral thing your campaign did.
Yeah, the reason I want to show this particular slide was actually just stepping away from the targeting for a second. I mean, this isn't just a talking point that makes us seem less big brothery. I mean, in reality, the day-to-day of the campaign was much more, for most people, of course there was an analytics group who were all about analytics, but for most people it was much more about figuring out how to be interesting and figuring out how to be relevant. And so this is probably the best example I've got. Toward the very end of the campaign, in September and October of 2012, our argument at the time, without, of course, getting into the politics of it, was that we were saying Governor Romney's tax plan didn't add up. And when we asked for details on how, in his view, it did add up, we thought he was a little bit evasive. And so if we can go to, if we can go to the next slide. What we did is we created this this site called RomneyTaxPlan.com, and they were kind of, you yeah. So you click the Get the Details button.
You can see it now, I think.
I'll let it go for a bit.
Okay.
Come on. All right. I think it's done soon. So, the RomneyTaxPlan.com, and you try to click Get the Details, and needless to say, you can't. So this thing was shared on Facebook 1.1 million times within a day. It was tweeted out 75,000 times. It's the only time in my whole professional life so far that my own mom has sent me something that came out of my team saying, hey, Teddy, you got to check this out. And I said, hey, Mom, what is it that you think I'm doing on the campaign? But the more important stat, and I actually think this serves another point that some of us were talking about at dinner. The most important stat, and the stat that I really love about this, is that 1.5 million people wound up reading a blog post about tax policy as a result of this. Because you can't click, of course, on the Get the Details button, but down at the bottom of the screen, if you guys can see, there's a line that says something, check out President Obama's, plan on taxes or whatever it is. And you actually can click on that, and that brings you to a perfectly serious blog post that explains our math and why we didn't, buy into his math. And 1.5 million people read it. And we looked at, did they scroll all the way to the bottom?
At least 1.5 million people clicked on it.
Well, as a matter of fact, we looked at, did they scroll all the way to the bottom, and did they appear to stay there for a little while? And actually, the time on site, now I'm getting really wonky here, but the amount of time that they spent on that page was way above average, and most people did scroll all the way to the bottom. And so, of course, you can't. I'm sure some people were just trying to click on the button and then ended up accidentally clicking on the blog post. But every indication was that at least a lot of those people, really did read the blog post. And I think the lesson that I take from that, I take a couple lessons from all this. One is, what it means to do a digital campaign or digital content of any kind isn't just, take the old kinds of content and make it look pretty and put it up on a website. This is a particular kind of content that, you literally couldn't have without the internet. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do the little effect with the button. And so to do it well and to do it right, you really got to take advantage of everything that the platform has to offer, and do content that kind of speaks the language of the internet and in some way, is kind of native to the internet. But then the other lesson, sorry.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say, Lindsay wants to move on to some other questions. I just want to make one point about this so people don't miss it. If you think this is all just about politics, think again, because any ad agency would love to be able to have somebody click on something and tweet it and retweet it or forward it 1.5 million times and then go to a website that sells you Coca-Cola or something else. So it's not just about politics, it's about the techniques of reaching people with a message of one sort or another. You wanted to move on to it.
Well, sure. I could easily get just as wonky about this as you. And I think one of the tools that I at least want to mention that we haven't talked about was the canvassing tool that Obama supporters could use. That was so groundbreaking in terms of people being able to canvass door to door, enter information about the voters that they talked to, and send that information back to headquarters. How did you implement that? How did that begin? How did that become such a focus of the campaign?
Let's change that slide one last time.
Well, let's see, what are we seeing here?
No, this is just the
back to that. I was like, we didn't have anybody on horseback. It's a great question. Now this is where we were a bit ideological as a department and as a group of people who really cared about the internet and trying to run the best digital campaign we could. Our operating principle coming into the second campaign was we wanted to provide the online supporter as good an experience as they could have as if they were walking into a field office in Cleveland. And when you walk into a field office in Cleveland or wherever, you're greeted at the door, it's friendly, people are getting together, people are talking, people know your name, there's food around, so the question was, how could we provide a digital experience for people that's almost as good as that, or as close to as possible as being as good as that. And so, we put a lot of time and development resources and money into creating a platform that allowed you to, do the exact same kinds of things as if you were going into a field office, knocking on doors, making phone calls, accessing the same kinds of data, entering that data in. I mean, if you are providing people a kludgy, clunky, multi-click experience, then that's not as good as it could be. So, we wanted to make sure that all this was smooth, and we also wanted to make sure that it was social, and this was a really key point. Part of what's so fun about volunteering for so many people is the friendships you make, and you get to know a staff field organizer, and that's kind of fun, and you get to know your fellow volunteers. So we also want to make sure that the digital volunteer experience isn't, some kind of antisocial, you're all by yourself in your living room with your laptop, and so we actually exposed people to the other people who were volunteering via their computer in their neighborhood, also gave them access to a staff field organizer, so it's not as if you have to go into an office to get to know a staffer. You can deal with a staffer on our website. But the principle basically there was, build a tool that replicates the offline volunteer experience for the online volunteer.
Great. Why don't we take some questions from the audience?
We have a tradition of a question from a student followed by a question from a non-student. I can't see who we've got here, so student. All right, let's take a student question. Okay, question is, did you ever have a social media effort that backfired on you, and how did you handle it?
Yes, and I handled it very badly. I was saying earlier, we were fortunate in that we didn't have any massive meltdown. So I wish I had a great story about something we did that was absolutely horrible. Here's one thing that we did once that has never been reported, partially because it's not that good a story. But one time there was a TweetDeck screw up where someone thought she was logged in as herself. Unfortunately, she was logged in as Barack Obama, President of the United States, retweeted something about a food truck. I don't even think he was in Chicago at that point, so he really was not concerned about the food truck. It wasn't that bad. We quickly deleted it and it was fine. We were, there's a lot of risk involved in social media because what you're trying to do all day is stand out in a crowd of people. And there's so many people, and it's not just like you're fighting against the Romney campaign. You're fighting against every brand and campaign and all your friends and family and whoever else that may be also posting to Facebook and posting to Twitter. And so, the question how you achieve, being constantly interesting without going too far is a tricky one. One that got us in trouble, do you guys remember the Lena Dunham ad that she cut for us toward the end of the campaign, where she analogized your first voting experience to, a different kind of first experience that may be memorable for people. So that, it's not like we didn't know that was risky. I would say that backfired in exactly the way we wanted, because to have a bunch of old white men talking, acting like that's the most scandalous thing they ever saw actually kind of plays into what we were hoping would come out of that. But there were a few other times. I was saying earlier, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Drudge Report. So if you're not, it's a news website run by a single guy who is very, very influential and tends to lean pretty far to the right. And so he would occasionally pick up on something that we tweeted or put on our Tumblr or something like that, and put it up as a headline to show how debased we were and how we had no standards and no manners as a campaign. And that was always a bit unpleasant, because for the obvious reasons, but there were no major backfires, I'm happy to say. The Romney folks, on the other hand, I'm much happier talking about their backfires. They famously, they had a series of backfires, all of which I'm happy to talk about, but they famously put out an app where you could take a picture and overlay it with like a filter, and the filter had misspelled the word America, the country that he was running to be president of. So that was, I thought that was a misfire, and there were a few others along those lines on their side.
So ever since 2012, Republicans have been really amping up their effort to their digital campaign. They've hired a chief technology officer. Are they going to be on a level playing field with Democrats in 2016 when it comes to the digital campaign?
Here's what I think about that. To me, it's always been a very silly notion that there's no, that there's no talent in the Republican Party. I mean, how many people work on campaigns? A couple thousand, of which a couple hundred maximum are dealing with technology and digital and analytics. Is it the case that there aren't a couple hundred really, really talented digital and technology people who are Republicans in this country? Of course there are. So, it's not that there's not talent. I mean, I do think the creative professions and the technology profession skews to the left, sure, but not so much that a campaign can't staff up with unbelievably talented people, even if they are Republicans. So it's not that there's not talent. You know, what I think there isn't, and this is not necessarily an intrinsically partisan issue in the sense that this could change awfully quickly, is, you know, our campaign, you know, I truly believe that whatever you think of President Obama, you may agree with him on the economy, you may disagree with him on the economy, you may think he's done a terrible job, you know, but he truly believes in the role of the grassroots in politics, and he truly has dedicated his whole life, back to when he was a community organizer, to elevating the role of individual people in their community and in the world around them. And so when we, you know, so we had smart analytics people and we had great creative people doing content, but more importantly, I think, you know, when we went out to people and said, you know, we need your $3 donation, not because it's going to be the difference between winning and losing, but because that's the kind of campaign we want to be. That's how we want to fund ourselves. And we need you to spend a Saturday knocking on doors, you know, because people should be engaged in politics. You know, there was an intrinsic credibility to that request. And, you know, I think with Romney and with McCain before him, you know, maybe they didn't have quite as much talent, maybe they did, but you know what they didn't have was that same authenticity and that same authentic belief in the power of the grassroots. So you may think that Romney is amazing. It just so happens that one of his priorities isn't elevating the grassroots in politics, and that's where I think the real gap is. But when I say that that's not intrinsically partisan, I mean it. You know, there's no particular reason why Democrats care about that or Republicans don't. It just so happened that President Obama cared about that, and that his two presidential opponents, I'm not going to say they didn't care about it, but that wasn't their sort of driving MO. And you know, we could easily end up with a situation in 2016 which would be the reverse. And if they're able to nominate someone and run a campaign that shows they really truly care about the involvement of ordinary people, they'll have an awful lot of success.
Let's take a question from a non-student. Yes, back there. Let me just paraphrase the question. The question is just asking you, you focused on Facebook and Twitter and other technologies, cell phones that have came up in 2008 and 2012. Do you see something new between now and 2016 that could revolutionize social media and campaigning again?
Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about this in a class earlier. You know, I think there's going to continue to be tremendous change, and I'll come back to that. I do think it is worth noting that, you know, in the past 10 years or so, we've had the rise of social media and we've had the rise of mobile technology. And those are really big changes, you know, that you don't see two or even one of those in every 10-year period. And I don't anticipate that in the next, you know, those are like historic changes. And I don't anticipate that in the next 10 years there'll be a new thing coming along necessarily that's as dramatic a change, not just to sort of how campaigns operate, but just how everybody lives, as mobile and social, which again are just enormous changes that both happen to have occurred in a relatively short span of time. That being said, you know, there clearly continues to be change, some that has to do with technological development, and some just sort of changes in the culture of the internet. You know, you're beginning to see Facebook retract. I talked to a whole bunch of students today who, you know, most are on Facebook, but they think of that as a way to keep tabs of their parents and grandparents. That is certainly not how we used it when I was in college. So, you know, these things are changing culturally, and then the technology continues to change. So, you know, just to name a couple things that I'm really intrigued by. You know, one is I think the world of content I mean, the world of content and media is changing unbelievably dramatically still. I mean, there's been really noticeable changes even just in the 2 years since the 2012 election. So that, I mean, I'm sure many of you saw, I mean, in the world of cable, you know, HBO Go is now available even to people who don't have a cable subscription, and you're seeing CBS begin to stream. You know, more within the world of the internet, you know, there's this new phenomenon of individual people on YouTube doing videos all by themselves and getting millions and millions and millions of views, the kind of view counts that you know, NBC News would kill for, and it's just some kid in a living room doing YouTube videos. So that's a very big change, I think, to how people, particularly young people, receive their information. You know, I think certainly the targeting capabilities that we're talking about are going to continue to become more sophisticated, especially when you add in the layer of the mobile phone. So even just 2 years ago, we didn't have all that many ways of connecting the mobile phone user to the desktop computer user. And so, you know, if you are doing, you know, coming to our website, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else on your desktop, you know, but most of the day you've just got a phone in your pocket, we have no way of connecting that. There's a whole series of changes, one interesting one being called a beacon technology, where brands and campaigns can access where you physically are by way of where your mobile phone is, and that's going to make a huge difference. I mean, imagine if a campaign, you know, had the ability to, you know, let's say there's a big rally with 20,000 people, and without their needing to sign up, they're able to send a notification to those 20,000 people just because they can tell that they're at the stadium where the rally is. And so things like that, I think, will be very interesting for politics in the next cycle. And then the last one I would mention is, one thing I think we're seeing is, in a really interesting way, young people are actually turning away from you know, what you would call traditional, not that they're that old, forms of social media. So, you know, Facebook and Twitter, you know, for the first 10 years of their existence, were all about broadcast and permanency. You know, you're telling everybody what you're telling them, and it's there forever. And, you know, if you look at the platforms that are really, really popular today with college kids, high school kids, you know, they're, you know, funny enough, you might think that they would embrace even more wholly the nature of social media as it used to be 5 years ago. They're actually the ones turning away from that and saying, well, I don't want everything I say to be permanent. I don't want everything I say to be public. And so, you know, something like Snapchat, which I assume most of the adults in the room are familiar with, it's a messaging service where the messages disappear 10 seconds or whatever after you open it. And so, you know, this is a way in which, you know, young people are kind of driving the growth of this platform. But it's them, you know, sort of turning away from the more, you know, from the more ridiculous elements of social media, from the public nature of it and the permanent nature of it. And I think watching as campaigns try to figure out what to do in an environment where you're actually seeing declining usage to some degree of Facebook, declining usage to some degree of Twitter, and increasing usage on these platforms that are not so political, not so public. It's not so easy to build a massive following like Instagram and like Snapchat is going to be really interesting, because it's a very big challenge. It's very tough.
Just for the record, Twitter's not 10 years old yet, okay? Facebook is.
Facebook is 10, Twitter's not. True.
We're on, I don't think I told you this, but we're streaming on something called Second Life, which you're probably familiar with. And we have a question from the US Southwest. And it's an interesting one about campaign fundraising using these media. You boasted about having raised $700 million using...
Well, I don't think I boasted.
No, not boasted. You reported objectively that you raised $700 million. And this questioner is asking, do you think campaigns today are primarily still using the web to fundraise money to be spent on traditional marketing channels? I presume that means like television ads. Or have campaigns begun shifting their strategies to virtual campaigns? And can a candidate with limited money, and now I guess I'm thinking of third-party candidates who traditionally haven't been able to raise much money, do they have a new ability to close the gap with marketing online? The questioner says guerrilla marketing online instead of traditional media spending. Is this going to open up a new opportunity, if you will, for candidates who are not in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party?
Yes. I mean, so to the first question, is money being shifted to online in a huge way? You know, we spent probably, I don't know the exact number, but something around 18 or 20% of our media budget online. That's going to look like a very low number in 2016. I mean, a very low number. And even whatever's done in 2016 will probably be low relative to where people actually spend their time. You know, so you still, in the advertising profession as a whole, not just political, see a real gap where, you know, people are spending more and more hours on their phones and fewer hours watching TV, and the media spend is beginning to reflect the usage, but not quite. So people are spending, you know, so as a share of budget, the budget being allocated to mobile platforms comes nowhere near a share of time. You know, so yes, money is going to move in a big way to digital media and also to technology development and things like that associated with all these changes. Now, as to the question, you know, is this going to help, you know, sort of long shot candidates or third party candidates win? You know, I think to some degree, you know, I think. Look, you know, you can swing the pendulum too far and imagine that TV ads are of no utility. Well, that's not true. TV ads are still very powerful. You know, so could a candidate win without them? Sure, but you'd be at a major disadvantage. Now, the other thing I think is kind of interesting, and I don't know if this is what the questioner has in mind or not, is all of this is also happening, and I think it's not a coincidence that this is all happening at the same time, as people are becoming fed up with the parties, and you're seeing these sort of fluky results like you saw with Eric Cantor in Virginia. And so, I think, obviously you have a newfound ability on the part of candidates to attract attention in non-traditional ways and less expensively, and you also have a newfound, or at least increased tendency on the part of voters to behave in unpredictable ways. And those two things together, I think, could have a very significant impact on elections. Not necessarily at the presidential level, that one's tough, but certainly down ballot.
Congressional, okay. And other. Question from a student.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, questions about the symbiosis between traditional news media and campaigns, and how are social media affecting that?
That's an excellent question that I have actually never been asked. So that's a great question. I think first of all, to the point of symbiosis, something that you learn from working on campaigns, and I'm sure you learned the same if you're a reporter, is boy, is there a symbiosis there. I don't think I fully realized just how much of political reporting, and this isn't even a criticism, by the way, this is a topic for another session, but how much of political reporting is really, about, just saying what the campaigns are asking them to say. And there is a bit of a camaraderie developed between campaigns and reporters to some degree. Most campaigners don't ever meet reporters, but certainly the communications departments do. And I think what a lot of them find is that they're going through the same stuff. When there's a crisis on a campaign and you have to go 2 nights without sleep on the campaign side, so do the reporters. And so in an interesting way, you're on different sides of the aisle, but you have more similar kinds of experiences than you would expect. So it's just been very. This is sort of tangential to your question, but it was very interesting for me, coming up through the campaign system to understand how much of reporting, really is about developing friendships between the two sides of the fence, and just how much of reporting is really, reporters sort of writing down what the campaign's asking them to write down. I think social is to some degree making that better and to some degree making that worse. I certainly think, one thing that we found in 2012 is, reporters spend all day on Twitter. It's basically a job requirement, and so do the campaigns, so do the campaign teams. And so, you're sort of all spending time in this sort of this sort of virtual town hall, communicating all day to some degree, or at least seeing the same pieces of information. And that probably makes it even easier for campaigns to sort of game the reporting system. But what you're also seeing is, in general, and this I think is probably more true than the other thing, you're seeing, it's increasingly difficult for campaigns to control the information that's out there about them. If you have an environment, as we obviously do, in which everyone in America has the ability to be receiving and spreading information all the time, then the ability of a campaign to sort of manage its own perception and manage its own brand and manage what people find out about them and when is dramatically reduced. And so, while there is a coziness between reporters and political campaigns that is probably not in the public interest, I think by and large, what Twitter and Facebook do is, make it harder for a campaign to dominate the message, and that's a good thing, I think, for the democracy. That can be a frustrating thing for campaigns, but that's a good thing for the democracy if reporters have no choice but to report on what actual human beings are talking about and interested in, and information is coming from more than just a couple of very high up sources within the government and the campaigns and so forth.
Okay, question from a non-student. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see any opportunities for the digital campaign to bring the issues back into our political debate as opposed to the horse race?
Okay, question is, will social media or the digital campaign help bring issues back to campaigning as distinct from the horse race that's traditionally been reported on by the mainstream media?
I really hope so. So I'm not sure, but I have reason for hope, and I'll tell you what that is. You know, the 2012 race, as you guys will remember, was characterized as the most negative race in the history of the country, which is not true if you go, I mean, you know, Aaron Burr literally killed somebody, so I mean, it's not true if you look back a long way. You know, but I mean, you know, it was negative if you were looking at the TV ads, which is what I think a lot of political reporting still does look at when they want to really talk about what the campaign strategically are doing. Well, you know, for a lot of people, especially young people who increasingly don't even have TVs, let alone watch TVs that often, you know, who are getting their information on social media, you know, they were seeing a completely different campaign, one that was not so negative, and one that was
all those ads are on the social media too.
Well, but they weren't. They were, but they weren't as effective, and they didn't represent as great a share of the overall messaging. So, a quick tangent, and then I promise, answer your question. The founder of BuzzFeed, Jonah Peretti, said something, and this was years ago, and it was just kind of an aside in an interview, but it really stuck with me. He said, BuzzFeed doesn't do all that much celebrity, I think everybody probably knows what BuzzFeed is, but if you don't, it's a social news site, so they create content specifically that they think is going to be shared on social media. And he said, BuzzFeed doesn't do a lot of celebrity gossip. And, you know, isn't that kind of interesting, because wouldn't you think that, you know, people like celebrity gossip, wouldn't you think that they would do a lot of it? And he said, well, you know, yes and no. Celebrity gossip is a guilty pleasure. So, you know, maybe on some level you're interested in it, and if you're at the airport and, you know, no one you know is around, that's when you buy your Us Weekly, and you hope you don't wind up running into a friend or a coworker. But you don't go post to Facebook about, you know, who just got divorced or who was spotted at which party, because that's just not how you want to present yourself. And we found a very similar dynamic with respect to politics on social media as distinct from on TV ads, where, you know, our TV ads, I cannot claim anything to the contrary. They were all about how Romney was terrible, and there wasn't a ton of substance for the most part in them. Well, what we found was that on Facebook, you know, very, very few people want to be the kind of person who shares a post about how Romney is terrible. You may think Romney is terrible, but you're perfectly aware that people are tired of the toxic politics of this country, and you don't want to be associated with that. So you're much more likely to share, and this is not just my opinion, I mean, this is borne out in what got shared and what didn't, much more likely to share information about, you know, even Obamacare, which isn't all that popular nationally speaking, you know, but a nice graphic about how it's working, or a video about the economic recovery, or the environment, or gay marriage was always a popular topic for us. And so, you know, I do think that, you know, people are very complex creatures, but social pressure is often a good thing. Not always a good thing, but often a good thing. And people do want to present themselves in the best possible light. And the more that that's the more that there's pressure being applied to political campaigns in the direction of people who need to represent themselves on social media, and, you know, the more, you know, the sort of what gets shared and what doesn't is a driver of political content, the less they're going to be able to get away with hypocritical stuff or negative stuff, and the more they're going to have to do the kind of positive, substantive stuff that their supporters think reflects well on them, and therefore they want to share. So it's not all good, but I think there's some reason for hope in that area.
Did you want? No. All right, let's take a question from a student. Is there a student on this side somewhere? No? Center? Student? No? All right, question from a non-student. Go for it. Oh, sorry. Say the last phrase again. Electability of candidates.
Once they get out of primaries.
Once they get out of primaries. All right, so the question is, does the combination of social media and the primary system affect the electability of candidates once they emerge from the primary period?
Yes, and this is one of the ways in which I think, you know, I was saying this earlier, I think by and large these are positive developments for the country, and I think there are some ways in which they're not. And I think, you know, one thing that is quite clearly happening, and there's a lot of reasons it's happening, the recession being one of them. I mean, you guys are political scientists by trade, so correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, there's always political turmoil following an economic downturn, always. So, you can't just say that this is because of social, but I think, one thing that is happening because of social is, if you're incentivizing people to, try to fight for attention in the very crowded landscape of social, then, to some degree you are exacerbating what's already built into our primary system, which is, people on the far left and the far right having advantages over people in the center. Notwithstanding what I said and believe in response to the previous question, it can be a little difficult to, the most inspiring, shareable message isn't necessarily going to be the one urging, moderation. It's often going to be the one saying, we need gay marriage now, or we need to, whatever, repeal Obamacare now. And so, I think quite obviously there is a degree to which, this is further polarizing or creating further incentives to extremism in primaries, which further polarizes who's up in general elections, which further polarizes the Congress. And that is not good.
I've been hoping to ask you this question all day, actually. It hasn't come up. I thought it might come up. You worked in 2008 at the state level in digital media, and then in 12 you did the national campaign. Were there differences? Did you learn something at the state level, or in retrospect maybe after the national level, are you thinking, aha, we apply these things differently at the state level than we do at the national level, or is it basically all the same?
That's a great question. It's hard to answer just because
media's been changing.
At the same time, the internet changed so much. So, how much was because of the state versus national effect, and how much was because of the internet? I will say that the closer you get to actual voters, and I really, really mean this, the closer you get to actual voters, the more respect you have for actual voters. It's easy to sit at headquarters or at home and watch CNN or watch whatever. I forgot that you work for CNN. Watch MSNBC,
Fox.
Fox, whatever. Or, you see these polls that say, whatever, 70% of Americans don't believe in climate change or something, and you think, oh God, how can that possibly be the case? And I don't know what's wrong with polling as a practice, but when you talk to voters, they're a lot smarter than you get the impression. And the overwhelming number of voters you talk to, even the far right Republicans and even the far left Democrats, have a fairly consistently shared set of values, really reject political hypocrisy, really reject political negativity, and then that's not always reflected in polling, and sometimes that's not always reflected in outcomes. But I would just say the closer you get to actual voters, the more you have respect for actual voters, which is why anyone who works on a campaign should go knock on doors every now and again, because you talk to people who are, I think it's easy to, I'm from New York, to sit in New York or to sit in LA or to sit in Houston, Texas, and say, who are these idiots who are undecided? And you talk to people who are actually undecided, and you realize they're wrestling with some pretty complicated stuff, and they're hearing a lot of information. They don't know what to trust, and they don't like the tenor of Washington and all that. It's very eye-opening to to be able to interact with actual voters, and gives you a lot of respect for people.
And you have talked a bit about influencing the polarization in this country. Given that the Constitution of the United States doesn't change very often, let's assume that, do you think social media are in a position, not immediately, but perhaps over the longer term future, to change the way our system is set up, so that, for example, the Electoral College might change, the redistricting system in states might change as a result of pressures from social media that could have a longer term impact on the functioning of democracy in this country?
Yes. I mean, here's what I think. And we were talking about it this a little bit earlier. Some of you guys in the crowd probably remember growing up with 3 television stations, and that's it. Many of you in the crowd remember growing up with maybe 20 television stations, but no ability to fast forward through commercials, and no ability to be interacting with your friends all the time, whether it be a text message or via the Twitter and Facebook. And what we've got now is a generation of voters coming up who not only don't remember those days, but never lived in those days and never will. And their entire experience of operating in the world and receiving information and developing and discussing political views, has played itself out in a landscape where they can read whatever they want, talk to whoever they want. If they're going to, they can comment on whatever they want. They can decide to listen to their best friend rather than CBS News or whoever, and that's a really dramatic, dramatic change. The people who are going to be first-time voters in 2016 would have been born in 1998. 1998. So they were 6 when Facebook was created. You know, they just have no connection to anything other than an on-demand world whatsoever. And then you've got, you know, you can call a taxi on your phone, you can get your dry cleaning delivered from your phone. I mean, you know, all these things have changed so rapidly. And the thing that doesn't seem to be working any better is government. And so I don't know, I didn't intend that as a laugh line, but I'll take it. So, you know, so I don't know what exactly is gonna happen specifically, but I do strongly suspect that, you know, when that's a generation of people that's in charge, which can't come soon enough in my opinion, you know, it's gonna seem so discordant that everything just seems to work, but politicians aren't responsive to them. So why should it be that taxi drivers are responsive, but your actual elected, you know, representatives aren't responsive? And I think that's going to exert massive and potentially rapid, not that it might happen tomorrow, but that it'll happen unexpectedly and very quickly at that point, change. Because I don't think that a generation of people who are used to all these things we're talking about are just going to tolerate a broken, inefficient, slow-moving government for their entire lives. It's going to be so out of touch with everything else in their lives. I think they're going to fix it somewhere or another. That's my opinion.
So if you had one piece of advice for, we have a lot of students who are minoring in political communication, majoring in political science, they're interested in getting into politics, what one piece of advice would you give them as someone who, you know, is now doing this professionally, if they want to get into this new world of digital campaigning and digital politics?
Well, we're entering into an election cycle in a couple of months. I talked to a bunch of people who are graduating in the spring and some who are graduating next spring. At a very practical level, I'll say, you know, campaigns are operate, you know, with the highest degree of urgency. When they need someone, they needed them yesterday, and so they're never going to hire a recruiter to go find the best possible candidate. They're probably going to hire from within the people they know. So nothing could stand you in better stead with a campaign to get a job in the first place than be there, volunteer for as long as it takes, and then you know, do a great job, and then you know, you'll be the first person they think of when there's an opening.
All right. We're afraid out of time, but before we say thanks to our guests, just a word about our next couple of National Agenda programs. 2 weeks from tonight, we're scheduled to hear from Mike McCurry, former White House spokesman for President Bill Clinton and a political strategist these days in Washington. But as I said earlier, Mike's schedule's a bit up in the air at the moment, so watch your email for possible changes on the November 12th program. On November 19th, we were scheduled to hear from David Plouffe and Steve Schmidt. David is unable to attend that program for very good reasons. Instead, we'll be hearing from Steve Schmidt and Stephanie Cutter, and you can look her up. Stephanie is another nationally ranked political strategist. She worked also in the White House, just as Plouffe did, and some of you who watch standard old-fashioned television will be quite familiar with Stephanie's abilities. If you want to be on the list to make sure you are notified about programs like this, please be sure to put your email address clearly on one of those bright orange sheets out in the lobby on your way out. And now, let's please thank our speaker tonight, Teddy Goff, for coming to the